Every government says its own money is reliable. Every government claims that the promises it makes will remain valid for many years. But when we pay a little attention to history, we see this. This feeling of trust is often not permanent. It was the same in Rome. It was the same in France. It was the same during the American Civil War, and it is the same in today's Lebanon. People opened their eyes one morning and saw that the savings they had built for years were no longer as valuable as they used to be. Their salaries lost their meaning. The plans they had made for the future melted away inside the systems they thought were solid. In reality, financial collapses are not as rare as we think. When you look at history over a long period of time, you see that collapses happen again and again. That is why the real question should not be, do financial systems collapse? The real question should be, when they collapse, how can we protect ourselves? Because one of the biggest financial mistakes people make is believing that the system they live in will continue forever. We look at our bank accounts. We look at the salary we receive. We look at the currency we use, and we think these things will always stay the same. But money is not as solid as we think. Money is actually trust, and trust can sometimes be lost in a very short time. That is exactly why we need to care about history. Because history does not only tell us what happened in the past, it shows us which mistakes people repeated, which assets truly protected their value, and which promises disappeared during moments of crisis. And if you pay attention, the people who come out of major crises in the best shape are usually not the ones who trust the system the most. They are the ones who start doubting the earliest. For example, think about the Byzantine Empire. Most of us know Byzantium as the Eastern Roman Empire that lived for another 1,000 years after Western Rome collapsed. But one of the most important things that kept Byzantium strong was its economy. And at the center of this economy was a gold coin called the Solidus. The Solidus was such a reliable coin that merchants accepted it without question in many places, from Europe to the Middle East, from Asia to Mediterranean trade. In fact, for that period, it was almost like one of the most reliable currencies in the world. But there is an important point here. You would think Byzantium would learn from the mistakes Rome had already made, right? During the Roman Empire, the silver coin called the denarius had constantly lost value. Emperors had reduced the silver content inside the coin in order to mint more money. After a certain point, the coin had lost its real value. We have seen this story many times before, but Byzantium fell into the same mistake again. This time not with silver, but with gold. Over time, the gold content inside the Solidus began to be reduced. Cheaper metals were mixed into it in order to produce more money. At first, people did not notice this very much, because the system still seemed to be working. But once trust begins to break, everything changes. That powerful coin, once the cornerstone of Mediterranean trade, gradually became only a symbol the state was trying to keep alive. As the currency lost its reliability, the economy also lost its former stability. So who managed to stay standing during this process? Not the ones who trusted the promises of the state, not the ones who believed in promises written on paper. Those who held real gold, owned land, or protected their wealth in areas the state could not easily reach were in a much better position. The first big lesson here is this. States tend to reduce the value of money during difficult times. And when they do this, real value usually moves toward assets that cannot be copied. But not every collapse happens because rulers play with money. Sometimes collapses can come from completely unexpected places. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe faced one of the greatest disasters in its history, the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1351, a very large part of Europe's population died. In some regions, almost half of the population disappeared. Cities emptied. Villages were abandoned. Trade routes broke down. While people were trying to survive, the economy also went through a major shock. But the economic impact of the Black Death was not only about destruction. Because when a large part of the population dies, the labor of the people who remain becomes much more valuable. Before, land was abundant and labor was easier to find. After the plague, the situation became the opposite. There was land, houses, and goods, but the number of people who could work, manage, and use them had decreased. This gave the survivors an unexpected power. Workers were able to demand higher wages. Peasants were able to ask for better conditions. Even people who had cash, silver, goods, or only their ability to work encountered opportunities they could never have imagined before. Land that had once been very expensive became cheaper to buy. There were empty houses. There were unworked fields. There were people who had to sell. So while the crisis was a major earthquake for some people, It also turned into an opportunity for those who were prepared. This may sound a little familiar to you, because during the COVID period we saw a modern example of this. Supply chains broke down. Governments printed trillions of dollars to keep the economy standing. Stock markets recovered in a short time. Housing prices rose. Those who owned assets became much stronger. But for people living paycheck to paycheck, the situation became much harder. Those trying to pay rent, those who lost their jobs, and those with no savings were left behind. On the other hand, those who had cash had the opportunity to buy stocks, houses, land, or businesses. The same pattern appears again and again throughout history. Crises redistribute wealth. It happened after the Black Death. It happened after the COVID period. Major crises usually reward those who have savings and punish those who do not. This sounds harsh, but history is often like this. While pandemics show us how the economy can change in an instant, Renaissance Florence tells us another lesson. Even institutions that are called too big to fail can fail. In the 1340s, Florence was one of the most important financial centers in Europe. There were powerful banking families like the Bardi and the Peruzzi. These banks were lending not only to merchants but even to kings. They had lent especially large amounts of money to King Edward III of England. But Edward could not repay these debts during his wars with France, and the results were very heavy. The banks collapsed. Depositors suffered great losses. Trade stopped. Even a rich and powerful city like Florence was dragged into financial chaos. Ordinary people had trusted powerful banks. They had thought that big names, big families, and big institutions were safe. But when the crisis came, they learned this. Being big does not mean being safe. Reputation does not always protect your money. This lesson repeated itself for centuries. We saw it in Florence. We saw it in Lehman Brothers in 2008. We saw it in Lebanese banks in 2019. The promises of institutions are valuable only until the day they can be kept. The American Civil War is also a very important example in this regard. This war is usually told through military conflicts, politics, and the abolition of slavery. But in the background there was also a huge financial war going on. Both the North and the South had to print money to finance the war. The Northern government put paper money called greenbacks into circulation. This money was not backed by gold. It was backed by the promise of the United States of America. At first this seemed like a brave and necessary step. But as more money entered the market, the purchasing power of money also fell. Inflation rose. People's trust in money was shaken. In the South, things were much worse. The Confederacy printed very large amounts of money in order to find resources. By the end of the war, inflation had reached record levels. Prices had increased thousands of times. Salaries were losing their value before they could even be spent. People had to carry bags full of money just to buy a loaf of bread. By 1865, Confederate money was not only weak, it was almost completely dead. During this process, what protected its value was not paper money. Land was valuable. Food was valuable. Gold was valuable. Real goods were valuable. For ordinary people, this was a great destruction. The money they had saved for years had disappeared, but those who had tangible assets, or those who could see opportunities during the crisis, were able to buy the things others were forced to sell at very low prices. This tells us something very important. Even your own country's money may not always be safe. In a crisis, what protects you may not be the piece of paper in your wallet, but real values that the system cannot easily devalue. A similar story happened during the French Revolution. In the 1790s, revolutionaries overthrew the monarchy, seized church lands, and issued a new paper currency based on those lands, the Assignat. In theory, this money was supposed to bring order to the economy, because behind it there was the value of the confiscated lands. But the problem was that the government began printing this money without limit. Each new issuance reduced the value of the previous money even more. Prices rose. Salaries could not keep up with this increase. People began buying less with the money in their hands. After a certain point, farmers did not want to give their products in exchange for paper money. They wanted silver, gold, goods, or barter. In Paris, riots began again. The revolution became trapped inside its own economic crisis. The winners in this collapse were not the ones holding paper money. They were the ones holding food, gold, and property. For ordinary Parisians, however, the lesson came too late. A currency is valuable only as long as people continue to accept it. When trust breaks, your savings may disappear not slowly, but sometimes very quickly. Let's move 2 centuries forward. This time, let's look at Asia. In 1997, the crisis that began with a speculative attack on the Thai baht quickly turned into a regional financial crisis. Thailand had long trusted that its currency would remain tied to the dollar. The country and its companies had taken on large amounts of dollar debt. But when the currency collapsed, these debts suddenly became much more expensive. Investors fled. After Thailand, countries such as Indonesia, Malaysia, and South Korea also came under heavy pressure. Currencies fell, economies shrank, unemployment increased. Governments had to ask the IMF for help. The people who suffered the most in this crisis were not the global investors who triggered the crisis. They were ordinary people. Those whose savings lost value, whose debts grew, who lost their jobs and who were forced to lose their homes or businesses. But once again, the same thing appeared. Those who held dollars or had assets abroad were in a better position. Those who trusted only the local currency suffered much greater losses. The clearest lesson of this crisis was this: borrowing in someone else's currency is very dangerous. When the storm comes, the side that usually drowns is not the creditor, but the debtor. Up to this point, the picture slowly becomes clearer. In Byzantium, France, America, and Asia, we see different periods and different events. But the basic story is the same. Paper money can lose value. Debts can chain people and countries. Institutions can fail. And the ones who come out best are not those who blindly rely on the system, but those who see the system's fragility in advance and take action. But this is not only something that happened in the past, it is still happening today. Lebanon is one of the closest and harshest examples of this. Between 2019 and 2021, banks in Lebanon began restricting people's access to their own money. People woke up one morning and saw that they could not withdraw the money in their bank accounts as they wished. Deposits were frozen. Withdrawal limits were introduced. The Lebanese pound lost more than 85% of its value. Money saved for years turned almost into pocket change within a few years. People lined up in front of banks. They pleaded to reach their own money, but most of the time they found closed doors in front of them. And this did not only hit the poor, it hit the middle class too. It hit retirees too. It hit doctors, engineers, and small business owners too. In other words, it hit everyone who had relied on the system. The lesson here is very harsh but very clear. The money in your bank is not a locked safe as you might think. Technically, that money is like a loan you have given to the bank. In normal times, this does not create a problem. But in times of crisis, when and how much of your money the bank will give back to you may no longer be under your control. Who were the best protected in Lebanon? Those who diversified their money and held assets abroad. Those who had real alternatives such as gold, property, or foreign currency. Those who were not completely dependent on the banking system. This should not feel like a distant story to you. In 2008, people in America lost their homes. Retirement accounts were damaged, but some of the large financial institutions that caused the crisis were rescued. During the pandemic in 2020, trillions of dollars were printed to keep the economy standing. This money protected the system from collapse, but at the same time it inflated asset prices. While those who owned stocks, housing, and other assets became even richer, many people living on salaries could not move forward at the same pace. In 2023, some regional banks in America collapsed in a very short time, because when people lose trust, no matter how good the banking system looks, at its core it is still based on trust. So the issue is not only ancient empires, the issue is still the same issue today. So how can a person protect themselves in a world like this? History does not give us a single answer, because every crisis is different. In Byzantium, the solution was gold. After the Black Death, it was liquidity. In Florence, it was not blindly trusting big banks. During the Confederacy, it was real goods. In France, it was food, gold, and property. In the Asian crisis, it was avoiding foreign currency debt. In Lebanon, it was being able to get out of the system before the banks closed their doors. In other words, the tools change, but the main idea stays the same. Survival does not come from blindly trusting paper promises or institutions. It comes from understanding what real value is. And there's a very important paradox here. Collapses are not only destruction, they are also opportunity. For unprepared people, crisis means loss. But for people who have cash, low debt, real assets, or the ability to produce, periods of crisis can sometimes turn into great opportunities. After the Black Death, some peasants became landowners, because there was too much land, but not enough people. After 2008, people with cash bought the homes that others had lost at low prices. During COVID, investors with liquidity collected assets from falling markets. That is why protection is not only about playing defense, it is also about being in the right position at the right time. When others are forced to sell in panic, you need to be in a position where you can buy. But here, we are not only talking about money and assets, because wealth is not only about what you own. What you can do is also very important. Throughout history, the people who survived crises were not only those who had gold or land. Bakers who could make bread survived too. Craftsmen who could repair tools survived too. Farmers who could feed society survived too. Merchants who could move goods from one place to another survived too. Because during crisis periods, the meaning of money may decrease, but the meaning of production does not disappear. People still have to eat. They have to find shelter. They have to repair, transport, produce, and trade. People who can meet these needs do not become completely helpless, no matter how much the system shakes. Maybe this is where real protection begins. Not just trusting the state, not just trusting the bank, not just trusting your salary, but looking through a lens that understands real assets, real skills, and the fragility of systems. Because every crisis is actually a transfer of wealth, from the trusting majority to the prepared minority, from paper promises to tangible values, from those who wait passively to those who produce actively. History has shown this countless times. That is why the issue is not whether everything will break down one day or not. Because history tells us this. At some point, systems will inevitably shake. The point is this: when that day comes, what will you have in your hands? Only promises, or something that truly carries value? History does not repeat itself exactly, but if you ignore it, it teaches you the same lessons much more harshly. If this video gave you a different perspective, do not forget to subscribe, because there are many answers inside history, and I will continue showing you where you need to look for them.